Between 1871 and 1914, we see that Germany undergoes a significant period of economic transformation. This involves looking at both industrial expansion, the examination of old and new industries, as well as international trade and global wealth, the ways in which all of this condenses together to show very significant economic developments. This lesson is going to talk about each of these in detail. We'll think about these four aspects, and we'll begin by thinking about industrial expansion. We'll talk about the old and new industries that are established under the new Imperial Germany. We'll think about trade and wealth and the development of trade and wealth, and then think about some of the social aspects of industrialization, something that we'll touch on in more detail in the next lesson when thinking about the social conditions of Germany by 1914, but at the very least we'll examine in minor detail in this lesson here. So in terms of industrial expansion, after the unification of Germany in 1871, we see that the economic growth that Germany undergoes is governed and driven by a combination of factors. You have, for example, large and skilled labor force. You have abundances of natural resources. You have a focus on technological innovation and infrastructure development. All of this connects to the growing conditions of the world, in fact, of Europe, which is that of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution. Industrial expansion occurred at an unprecedented rate during this period, changing Germany from a primarily agrarian society to a highly industrialized nation. One such example of where this takes place is in the development of infrastructure. So Germany made massive investments in infrastructure. The two most important examples were that of railroads and telegraphs, which connected the country and facilitated the transports of goods, raw materials, and people. And this is why we see that by 1914, Germany had one of the most expansive and modern modern railway networks. It becomes a military railway network, I guess, during the First World War, but one of the most extensive and modern railway networks in the world. This was crucial for moving raw materials, for example, coal, iron, and manufactured goods from production sites to markets domestically and also abroad across the rest of Europe. Rapid industrialization led to urbanization, urban growth, the establishment of larger cities and more people moving and migrating into the cities. People therefore migrated from rural areas into factories and industrial centers. For example, major cities such as Berlin and Hamburg were expanded incredibly fast, but then you also have very industrialized regions in places like, for example, the Ruhr Valley in the west of Germany that also expanded quickly, becoming the very important hubs of industry and commerce. Urbanization further supported industrialization, and it further concentrated the labor force and the consumer base, which then further increases more economic output, which then further increases urbanization. And it's a cycle that it continues and continues, and it leads to an increase in the growth of these urban centers. Through the German education system, we saw there was particularly important technical and engineering disciplines. This also played a vital role in supporting industrial expansion. Germany became known, for example, for its research in institutions and technical universities, fostering innovation such as that of chemistry, electrical engineering, and manufacturing processes. German chemists and engineers contributed to advancements that allowed for efficient production and further spurred the development of new industries. And this sort of brings us on to the next point, the next question, the idea of new and old industries. So industrialization in Germany was marked by an expansion of already established industries. So, for example, the established industries such as that of coal, iron, and textiles. But it also gave rise to new industries, particularly in terms of chemicals, electrical engineering, and machinery. This combination of the two not only led to them interacting with each other and helping each other grow, but also led to just further economic and industrial production that made Germany a leader in this regard. So, in terms of established industries, i.e. old industries, you have, of course, coal and iron. Coal and iron industries were central to German industrialization. Some of the areas around Germany, as mapped here, it's a quite blurry picture, unfortunately, but it is mapped here, that were particularly important for coal and iron production were, of course, the Ruhr Valley, the Saarland, and Silesia. They were all major centres in terms of coal mining and iron production, and they also surged due to the demand for steel in railways, construction, and armaments creation. By the late 19th century, Germany was one of the world's top producers of coal and iron, supplying domestic industries and exporting those to other countries. The steel industry was also very, very important. The Bessemer and later Siemens Martin processors revolutionized steel production. This was essentially two processors that was able to create mass production at a much lower cost. And so as a result of these two revolutions in steel production and productivity, the German steel production rose significantly, especially surpassing the British output by the early 20th century, between 1900 and 1914. This meant that steel was crucial for a number of projects that we've already spoken about, infrastructure projects including the military, and also in terms of the growing automobile industry that we start to see as well. Finally then, in terms of old industries, textiles became very prominent compared to heavy industries as well. So they remained a very significant sector in Germany. Industry saw improvements in efficiency due to mechanization, although it would begin to decline in terms of its relative importance because of just how much impact did heavy industries provide for the German expansion. Newer industries then included things like chemicals and chemical industries. This was arguably one of the most advanced in the world by 1914. German chemists pioneered the development of synthetic dyes, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, and explosives. The industry was dominated by large firms like BASF or Bayer or Hohenst, or Hohenst. I'm not pronouncing these words particularly well, but these all became global leaders in chemical productions. Eventually, Germany's innovations in this field gave it a competitive edge, especially when it came to the application of synthetic dyes for extensive applications in manufacturing and textiles engineering. Electrical engineering was also an area in which Germany by 1914 had become one of the world's leading areas. So companies like Siemens and AEG spearheaded advancements in electrical products and production. For example, the issue of telecommunication systems. Some of the infrastructure policies that we've already spoken about included the telecommunications of the entire country. Germany's innovation as an electrical power and manufacturing equipment allowed it to dominate the market, and this new industry made electricity more accessible for industrial, commercial, and domestic use. And so when we think about exports of these electrical engineering systems, by 1914, German firms were exporting electrical goods globally, and Germany had become a leader in this sector of industry. Finally then, in terms of newer industries, the automobile industry, of course, was beginning to emerge as a major player in terms of economic output, especially by the early 20th century. Innovators like, for example, Carl Benz, who of course is noted for Mercedes-Benz, and Gottlieb Daimler were also very important pioneers when it came to the establishment of the internal combustion engine, leading to the development of gasoline-powered cars. Not yet a major industry by 1914, really anywhere in the world, it still nevertheless was a growing sign of the diversification of the industrial base within Imperial Germany. So in terms of the ways in which this was going to be impactful on a global scale, as German industrial capacity grew, so too did its engagement with global trade, and its national wealth as a result of this would increase significantly. The result was that by 1914, Germany was one of the largest exporting nations in the world. And so international trade and exports was particularly important. A number of exports included coal, iron, steel, machinery, and chemicals, which were all in high demand on a global scale. German goods became known for their quality and for their innovation, helping the nation to capture large portions of the international consumer markets. Germany's trade policies and partnerships included exports to countries in Europe, the Americas, Asia, and of course, German countries had established themselves as a presence overseas. And these presence overseas would not be possible if it wasn't for the impact of colonialism and colonial expansion. We know, for example, that Wilhelm II had a much more expansive colonial policy than that of his predecessor, Wilhelm I. And although Germany was a latecomer to colonialism compared to that of Britain and France, it still nevertheless began to acquire territories across overseas in the late 19th century. So parts of Africa included German East Africa, German Southwest Africa, Cameroon and Togo, as well as the Pacific in places like New Guinea and Samoa were both German colonies. They provided for new markets for German products, for raw materials, for example rubber, which became important for industrial needs in this area. In terms of the financial sector, you have banks such as Deutsche Bank and Dresdner Bank, as well as Commerzbank, providing the capital needed for large-scale industrial projects and infrastructure developments as well. While unlike British banks, which were seen as more conservative and viewed themselves as separate from industry, German banks actively partnered with industrial firms, and this facilitated close connections between finance and industry. All of this then leads to a growth of national wealth, and with that, an increase in the standard of living. We'll get to the social aspects in a second, but essentially urban infrastructure improved, and so too did better housing, sanitation and public services, although it should be noted that factory workers still nevertheless faced very poor working conditions, very long hours, and there was very much a significant amount of repression in terms of labour movements and unionisation. And so when we think about the social impacts of industrialization, we can see that in terms of labor movements and social reforms, industrialization led to the growth of a very prevalent working class. Now, this prevalent working class did face challenging conditions, as I've just mentioned. It faced long hours, low wages, unsafe working environments. In response, the labor movement, particularly under the remit of the Social Democratic Party, the SDP, grew in strength and became a leading advocate for the rights of workers. You should note that as well, Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor between 1871 and 1888, introduced pioneering social insurance programs in health, accident, and old age insurance to counter the appeals of socialism. Essentially, what Bismarck believed as a sort of studious statesman was that being able to essentially provide the basic needs of the workers would turn those people away from the more radical policies that are associated with Marxist communism and socialism. While it was the case that industrialization did create wealth, it also led to increased income disparities. Industrialists and bankers became extremely wealthy, whereas the working class citizens struggled with the high demands of labor, as you can probably imagine. The industrial economy led to and lessened the influence of the traditional aristocracy, the Junkers. This increased the power of industrialists and financiers and created a new elite class within German society. This played a significant and particularly influential role when it came to supporting nationalist policies and military expansion. They would often align with Kaiser Wilhelm II's ambitions for Germany as a global power. Finally then, with industrialization and a booming economy, you also see the rise of Germany as a military power, especially under Wilhelm II. The government invested heavily in military expansion. Germany's industrial base supported the production of particularly advanced weaponry and new weapons, and this economic strength also tied itself to not only nationalistic pride in a sense of economic nationalism, but also in terms of militaristic ambitions, laying the groundwork for Germany's involvement in international conflicts. And so, generally speaking, if you were to look at the German Empire by 1914, you would note that from a broad perspective, there was definitely economic, industrial, and financial expansion. A very clear industrialization process takes place. But when you dig down to the surface, there was still quite significant income and wealth disparities, as well as poor working conditions for those who were actually at the lower parts of the working classes in these industrial centers. This obviously ties into a little bit the social aspects of Imperial Germany between 1871 and 1914, which will be the topic of the next lesson.